Okay, I have a quick question for everyone. How many of you have ever donated your time or your money to any cause at any time? Look at that. Almost everybody has done that at some time or other, and we do that because we want to make a difference. We want things to be a little bit better in our local community or in our global community. But although all of us are very well trained for our careers and our educations, very few people are actually trained in how to give. And so the elephant in the room that I'd like to address today is that not all giving is good. I went to Kenya for the first time in 2009, and I met Sylvia Niddle there. And we went back to Kenya every year from 2009 to 2018, when unfortunately Sylvia got sick and she's since passed away. But in that time, we learned so many lessons. It was like going to social responsibility school, actually. And so I'd like to share with you today some of those lessons and hope that it might make you think a little, ponder a little about the giving that you do so that we can all have the impact that we want from the giving that we do. I'd like to introduce you to some teachers. You'll meet lots of them throughout the talk. But there's some right here in the slide with Sylvia. Students, various people that we work with at the Conservancy, support staff, our van driver, and even down to really small children. They teach us new things every single day, and they are our teachers. So I'm a wildlife biologist, and the first time I went to Kenya, I was so excited to see elephants in the wild. I had grown up, they were always my favorite animal, and I imagined seeing them out there on the wide open plains, you know, with lions and cheetahs, and they are, and that is amazing. And if you've never had the opportunity to do that, I highly recommend it. It's very, very interesting. But what you don't really know until you go, or at least I didn't, was that there's also, in lots of areas, people that are living there as well. And many people who live in rural Kenya are subsistence farmers. So they have a small plot of land right next to their house, and they grow food crops there that actually support the livelihood of their own family. And elephants are very difficult to live near because they're huge and eat a lot, and even just walking through your garden can completely destroy your ability to feed your own family. So this human-wildlife conflict is a really big issue in the area of Kenya where we go. So my first lesson is that everything is complicated. And you'll find that even in local communities, whether you're trying to support here, near your own home or abroad, that the complexity is always there. So this is where Sylvia and I get to do our education, as well as lots of other people who come on various summers. It's the Old Pajeta Conservancy, which is a 90,000-acre not-for-profit wildlife conservation area right in the middle of Kenya. And they are most well known for the fact that they have the largest population of black rhinos of all of Eastern Africa. They also have the two last northern white rhinos on the earth. So they were realizing that elephants and lions and rhinos are very, very difficult to protect unless you have the support of the community that lives around the Conservancy. When you go there, it really feels like you're just in a national park, and they have all the African wildlife that you could ever want to see. So in 2006, with this realization of this human-wildlife conflict that was happening, they engaged the local communities and asked them what were some of the major supports that they would need in order to be able to really see the value of the conservation area being there and therefore help protect the wildlife. And so they mentioned things like health and roads and agriculture, water, and of course, education. And education was actually the most important thing that they wanted support for in that community. And that is because secondary school, there are fees, and most students can't afford those fees, or families can't afford those fees. So this is where Pamoja comes in, and this is the organization that I learned about when I met Sylvia in 2009. And she explained to me that they support the education initiatives and so that the community can actually help protect the wildlife. And so it was perfect for me, like education and wild organization. So that was awesome. And so really what we do is we have schools here in Canada and the United States where there are clubs, and those kids will actually be connected with one of our scholarship students. So they actually get to learn about that student, break down some stereotypes, as well as do some fundraising to support the scholarship for that particular student. So I'm also a teacher here in British Columbia, and we have a new curriculum here, and like many jurisdictions around the world, this new curriculum actually includes a social responsibility component to it. And I honestly get to work with some of the most fantastic young people. It gives me hope, so much hope for the future. They are amazing. And there are a lot of students that really care about making a difference in the world. They want to have a positive impact. But part of the problem is that we are teachers, and as I said at the beginning, most of us don't have training in social responsibility, but we're actually supposed to teach students how to be socially responsible. So it's a little bit tricky. But the highest level of social responsibility in the British Columbia curriculum says, I can initiate positive, sustainable change for others and the environment. And I think these two words, positive and sustainable, are so important. We need to keep them in mind. But I want to tell you a story. So this is Winnie. She went to school all through primary school, did really, really well. And when she went to secondary school, she got called to a boarding school in the area around the Conservancy. She went to school for her first semester and then went home for the school holidays. And when the school holidays were over and school came back in, she didn't return to school. Now, the principal at that time, he knew that something was wrong because Winnie loved school and she was a fantastic student. So he actually got police officers and went to her home and said, "Where's Winnie?" And her parents said, "Sorry, you're too late. She's been married and there's nothing you can do." But this principal, his name is John, and he doesn't take no for an answer. So he actually went with the police officers to this plot of land and found Winnie there and asked Winnie whether she would like to come back to school or to stay with this new family. Now, going back to lesson 1, that everything is complicated, this is not an easy decision for Winnie. She is 14 years old, and her family was involved in this wedding, so obviously she would have to distance herself from her family and her community in order to go back to school. But that's what she wanted to do. So John and his family said that they could support her during the school holidays, but they couldn't afford to pay her school fees. This was right when the Conservancy was creating their community development program. And so John knew this. He called the Conservancy and said, "Is there any way that you can provide a scholarship for Winnie to go to school?" They contacted Pamoja, and Winnie became our first scholarship student. This is Winnie in university. That's John next to her. And she did a computer technology degree. And this is Winnie now. She has her own business in Nairobi. She has a husband and 2 kids. And when I talked to her recently about whether or not I could share her story, she said yes, and that decision totally changed my life. So please feel free to share that with everybody. This is James. He's a student who is involved in our online collaborative learning program that we have. He came here in 2016 on a student exchange, and we were walking by the water one day, and I asked James, "What do you think Kenyans want?" And he said, "Kenyans want opportunity, not charity." And this has really been our slogan ever since, because opportunity is positive and sustainable. And so it really meets those highest levels of social responsibility. Now, charity is important sometimes. Like, they just had a cyclone in Africa recently. And for immediate problems like that, charity is important. But for long-term issues, like trying to support a community to help protect wildlife conservation, opportunities are going to have a much bigger impact. There's a researcher named Julia Galef who studies human mindsets. So she talks about a soldier mindset where you're really attached to your beliefs, whether that's about your political party or your various sports teams. And it's really hard to move people off of those opinions or mindsets. And then she talks about another mindset, which is a scout mindset, where you try to see what's really there. And she says there are 3 important characteristics of people who are scouts. They have a sense of curiosity, they are open, and they are grounded. And by grounded, she means they're actually people who actually like being wrong, or they, at least in the face of new evidence, are willing to change their mind. And so when it comes to giving, I think this is really important. Sylvia used to say she didn't want to go through her life with a period at the end of a sentence, but she wanted to go through her life with a question mark at the end of a sentence. And that question mark is a scout mindset. So sometimes people get defensive about the charities or the organizations that they're supporting. And I think it's really important to try to not do that, to try to be as open as you possibly can and be curious about what other information might be out there and be open to changing your mind. So my lesson 3 is to have a scout mindset. Now in 2010, I went to Kenya for the second time, and there was a terrible, terrible drought in the area where we work. Nothing was growing, and they were actually having to truck in food to feed the local people. There were cows dying at the side of the road, and every school visit we went to, we were seeing students malnourished. It was really, really hard for us to see that, and we wanted to do something about it. So we went to the community manager from the Conservancy and asked whether or not we should take some of our scholarship money from that year and put it into some immediate food aid for the people who were being harmed by this drought. And he said to us, "Don't do that. That is a bad idea. Droughts come and go in Africa, and if you take those students out of school now, they won't be able to provide for their families the next time a drought comes around." And what he was really telling us was that we were wanting to do charity, and he wanted us to continue to provide opportunities for students. And so we did. But the lesson here is to ask questions, be open to others asking you questions as well, and listen. We aren't always the best listeners, Canadians, North Americans, and sometimes we almost competitively talk, and we have to actually really stop ourselves to make sure that we listen to what people who live there, who are our teachers, have to say about their culture. We weren't always known as Pamoja. We were initially called Project Kenya Sister Schools. And when we were in Kenya in 2013, we started to hear people kind of misusing our name. They couldn't remember it, and we used to use an acronym, and they couldn't remember that acronym either. So we pulled some people together, and we asked them whether or not they understood what our name meant, trying to have a scout mindset. And they said, actually, we don't really know what it means. Like, what's the project? And do you only support girls, but we support both boys and girls? And then they didn't know whether we were a religious organization, but we are a non-denominational charity. So we decided to gather our stakeholder groups together. We had teachers, students, people from the Conservancy, community leaders, and we all worked together to try to find a name that really worked for all the connections that we have. And we all came up with the name Pamoja, which means together in Swahili. And it really does work well for our organization because there are so many moving parts. We have schools here and schools in Kenya and the Conservancy and the communities. So recently I was talking to a friend of mine and I shared this story, and she said, "Really, you changed your name? Is nothing sacred?" And I said, actually, nothing is sacred, because our goal is to support the community so that they will in turn help protect the wildlife. And if they don't understand our name, then that's a problem. And so we have to change it. But that really does require this scout mindset. People worked really hard on that name, and we had it for 7 years, and we had a lot of materials. And so changing it required a lot of work. But my 5th lesson is to make sure that what you're doing really does align with your goals, and you have to keep refreshing yourself as to what those goals really are. So my last story is about Joel and his family. And in 2013, Joel's house burned down. Now, he has 2 parents and 8 siblings, and so they were all trying to live in that little house behind the picture there on the right-hand side. So, of course, that was a problem, and the community around really felt for this family, and they wanted to support the family, but they couldn't afford to do it. And every summer when we go, we often have a little bit of money that we can do some small community projects with. So they asked us, the community asked us, whether or not we could build Joel's family a house. So we went to the Conservancy, as we were getting into the habit of doing, and we asked them whether they thought this was a good idea. And they said, yes, the community thinks it's a good idea, it'll work. So we never do any job that can be done by a Kenyan, and we always buy our materials locally. So we went into town, we went to local hardware stores, bought all the materials, hired some local carpenters, and we built Joel a house, or they built Joel a house. We bought some locally made furniture, we went to the market, got them clothes and shoes, and everything was good. Then the next year we came back and we wanted to build an extension onto their house, maybe buy them some more clothes and shoes. So we went to the Conservancy and we said, do you think this is a good idea? And they said, no, that's actually not a good idea, because last year everyone agreed that that's what the family needed. But now if you do more for that family, it might be considered unfair, and it really could erode the relationships that that family has with their own community. And their community is really important, obviously, in this area of Kenya. So my lesson 6 is that sometimes giving can actually hurt people, and you really do have to be careful. So as I refresh the lessons that I went through today, I want you to think about, almost everybody put up their hand at the very beginning, and I want you to think about the giving that you do. And how does that make you feel? Do you have a scout mindset? Do you know whether it's opportunity or charity? And do you know that what's happening is aligning with your goals? Are you open to hearing new things? And as a teacher, this is where I want to be working with kids. I want the kids to be the ones. They're not just having a fundraiser or, selling cupcakes over here or something. They really understand what the organizations are doing that they're supporting. They feel comfortable to ask the hard questions. They're okay to listen, see whether or not it's actually opportunity or charity, and know why one might be used in one context and another in another context. And so it's really very, very fun to be working with kids and having them become critical thinkers about giving. So I've been able to go to Kenya for the last 10 years, and it has absolutely changed my life. It's been the most amazing learning experience from all these various teachers that we get to interact with. I can't wait to go again this summer. But the learning is tricky, right? It's like any kind of learning. You make mistakes, you try new things, but really, I think if we listen to some of these lessons that we learned, and there will be more, I guarantee, but I think if we do listen to these kinds of lessons, we can make sure to get rid of the elephant in the room, and we can make sure that our giving really has the positive impact that we want it to have, and hopefully, from my perspective, keep the elephants in the wild. Thank you.